When I picked up the phone to ask my son-in-law Brody about the specific date of the wedding so I could book my flight. His laughter crackled through the speaker like static. It was a cold, dismissive sound that made the hair on my arms stand up. "Oh, the wedding," he said, his voice dripping with a casual cruelty that stopped my heart. "We actually got married yesterday, Garrison. It was a very intimate thing. Very small. We only invited special people. You understand, right? You are getting older, and the noise and the travel would have just been too much for you. We did it for your own good." I stood there in my living room looking at the $2,000 Armani suit hanging on my closet door, the plastic wrap still on it. I am the father of the bride. I paid for the engagement party. I paid for the deposit on their apartment. But I was not a special person. I did not say a word. I simply hung up the phone. My hand did not shake. I felt a coldness settle in my chest, a freezing over of 40 years of fatherly love. Exactly 1 week later, on the 5th of the month, my phone rang again. The screen flashed Brody's name. I answered on the second ring. He didn't say hello. He didn't ask how I was. "The rent is overdue." "Garrison," he barked. "The landlord is blowing up my phone. It is $3,800. Did you forget to make the transfer? You are getting forgetful lately. Send it now." I took a slow sip of my black coffee, looking out at the gray Chicago skyline. I let the silence stretch for 5 seconds, 10 seconds, until I could hear his irritated breathing. Then I replied with a voice as flat and hard as concrete. "I thought I already told you, Brody. I only pay rent for special people." Before I continue this story of how I taught my ungrateful daughter and her shark of a husband a lesson they will never forget, please like and subscribe to the channel. Let me know in the comments where you are watching from. That silence in my kitchen after I hung up on Brody the first time was louder than any scream. It was the sound of a reality shattering. For 4 years, I have played the role of the retired, slightly out-of-touch widower. I live in a modest 3-bedroom house in the suburbs. I drive a Ford truck that is 6 years old. I clip coupons for the grocery store. To my daughter Maya and her husband Brody, I am just Garrison, the old logistics manager, who got a lucky severance package and is slowly spending his retirement savings to keep them comfortable. They see a man whose useful life is coming to an end. They do not know who I really am. They do not know that when I sold my logistics firm 5 years ago, I didn't just get a severance package. I walked away with a portfolio that puts me in the top 1% of this state. They do not know that the apartment they live in, that penthouse with the view of Lake Michigan that they love to show off on Instagram, is not rented from a property management company. It is owned by a limited liability company that I control. I am their landlord. I am their bank. I am the safety net they have been jumping on with muddy boots for years. I sat down at my kitchen table and pulled the envelope out of my jacket pocket. Inside was a cashier's check for $50,000. It was supposed to be my wedding gift to them. A surprise. I had planned to hand it to Maya during the father-daughter dance. I had imagined her tears, her hug, the way she would look at me and realize that her old dad always had her back. I looked at the check. I looked at the name Maya Ford written on the beneficiary line. Then I took my lighter out of my pocket. I watched the corner of the check turn brown, then curl into orange flame. I dropped it into this ashtray and watched $50,000 turn into ash. It was a clean burn. It felt appropriate. If I wasn't special enough to see my only daughter say I do, then my money wasn't special enough to pay for their honeymoon. It wasn't just the exclusion that hurt. It was the lie. Small ceremony. Intimate. That is what Brody had said. But my gut, honed by 40 years of managing supply chains and sniffing out dishonest vendors, told me he was lying. You do not exclude the father of the bride for a small ceremony unless you are ashamed of him. and I needed to know why. I am 68 years old, but I am not tech illiterate. However, Brody and Maya have me blocked on most social media platforms. They say it is because I leave embarrassing comments like telling them to wear a coat when it is cold. I knew I needed to see what really happened yesterday. I called an old friend of mine, a man I worked with back in the 80s, who transitioned into cybersecurity. He came over within the hour. We didn't talk much. He opened his laptop, ran a few searches, and bypassed their privacy settings in minutes. What came up on the screen made the bile rise in my throat. It was not a small ceremony. It was a coronation. The photos loaded one by one high-resolution evidence of my betrayal. The venue was the Grand Ballroom at the Peninsula Hotel. I know that room. The rental fee alone is more than my truck is worth. There were at least 200 guests. I saw business partners Brody had been trying to impress. I saw influencers Maya follows. I saw people I had known for years, people who probably asked where I was, and I wondered what lie they were told. Maybe that I was sick. Maybe that I was dead. Then I saw Maya. She looked beautiful. She was wearing a dress that I knew cost $20,000 because I saw the charge on the supplementary credit card I gave her for emergencies. Apparently, a custom Vera Wang gown constitutes an emergency. But that wasn't what broke me. What broke me was what was around her neck. She was wearing Catherine's necklace, my late wife, Maya's mother. It was a vintage diamond cluster that Catherine only wore on our anniversaries. When Catherine passed, I let Maya borrow it, telling her to keep it safe. In the photo, the diamonds caught the light of the chandeliers sparkling on the neck of a daughter who couldn't even pick up the phone to invite her father to her wedding. And then the final blow. The photo of the walk down the aisle. Maya was not walking alone. She was clinging to the arm of a man in a flashy silver suit, a man with a tan that came from a bottle and a smile that looked like it cost more than my house. It was Brody's stepfather, the used car dealership tycoon. The man Brody always bragged about, the man Brody desperately wanted to be. There he was, taking my place, giving my daughter away, basking in the attention, playing the patriarch. I zoomed in on Maya's face. She looked happy. She didn't look like she was missing her father. She looked like she was exactly where she wanted to be, surrounded by money, by flash, by people who looked expensive. I realized then that I didn't fit this picture. I am a man of logistics, of concrete and steel and schedules. I am not flashy. I do not wear silver suits. I was cut out of the frame because I ruined the aesthetic. I closed the laptop. "Thank you," I told my friend. He looked at me, his face grim. "Garrison, if you want, I can crash their registry. I can wipe their digital footprint." I shook my head. "No. That is too fast. They need to feel this. They need to understand that the faucet they have been drinking from has a shut-off valve, and I am the one with the wrench." For the next 6 days, I went about my routine. I went to the gym. I worked in my garden. I walked my dog. But inside, I was rewiring the entire infrastructure of my relationship with my daughter and her husband. I was shifting from father mode to auditor mode. I went into my home office and pulled out the file labeled Maya and Brody. It was thick. It contained the lease agreement for their apartment. It contained the statements for the credit cards I paid off every month. It contained the records of the car payments I made for Brody's Range Rover because he said he needed a reliable vehicle for real estate showings. I pulled up the spreadsheet where I tracked my expenses. I looked at the line item for their support. $4,000 a month for rent, $2,000 for credit cards, $1,000 for car payments, insurance, utilities, cell phones. It added up to nearly $8,000 a month. That is $96,000 a year. A post-tax salary for a successful executive given freely as a gift because I wanted them to have the start in life I didn't have. I opened my banking app. I navigated to the Scheduled Transfers tab. There it was, the monthly rent transfer set to execute on the 5th. I hovered my mouse over the cancel button. For a second, just a split second, I hesitated. I thought about Maya when she was 5 asking me to check under her bed for monsters. I thought about the promise I made to Catherine on her deathbed that I would always look out for our little girl. But then I looked at the black screen of the laptop, where the image of the silver suit still burned in my mind. I am looking out for her, I whispered to the empty room. I am teaching her that actions have consequences. I clicked cancel. Then I went to the credit card portal. I reported the supplementary cards as lost or stolen and requested they be deactivated immediately. I went to the insurance company website and removed Brody's car from my fleet policy. It took me less than 30 minutes to dismantle the financial support system I had built over 4 years. It was surgical. It was silent. It was done. Then I waited. I knew exactly when the call would come. Brody is not a man of details, but he knows when money is due. The 5th of the month fell on a Tuesday. At 9 in the morning, the landlord, who is technically a shell company I own managed by a property firm, sends out the automated late notices. At 9:15, my phone rang. I let it go to voicemail. At 9:30, it rang again. At 10, a text message. Dad, did you forget the transfer? At 10:45, another text. This is urgent. Please call back. By noon, he was calling every 10 minutes. I sat in my garden pruning my roses, listening to the phone buzz on the patio table. I was enjoying the rhythm of it. Each buzz was a signal that panic was setting in. Finally, at 1 o'clock, I answered. The conversation was short. He was aggressive, entitled, treating me like an employee who had failed a task. He reminded me of the rent amount. He tried to guilt me. He asked if I was getting senile, and I delivered the line I had rehearsed for a week. I told him I only pay for special people. I hung up before he could respond. I turned my phone off. I poured myself another cup of coffee and sat back. I knew this was just the opening shot. Brody is a narcissist and a bully. He does not take no for an answer, especially when that answer threatens his lifestyle. Maya is weak, easily manipulated by him, and accustomed to a life of ease. They would not just accept this. They would come for me. They would come with anger. They would come with guilt. They would use everything they had to force the tap back open. I looked at the gate of my driveway. I knew that within 24 hours they would be standing there. They would bring the storm to my doorstep. But they forgot one thing. I spent 40 years in logistics. I spent 40 years anticipating disasters, preparing for strikes, for weather, for supply chain collapses. I do not start a war I am not prepared to finish. I went back inside and called my lawyer, Mr. Pendergast. He is a man who makes sharks look like goldfish. Pendergast, I said when he answered. It has started. Prepare the eviction notices for the LLC and get the forensic accountants ready. I want a full audit of Brody's business dealings. If he is going to play dirty, I want to know exactly how much mud he is standing in. Pendergast laughed, a dry, dusty sound. Garrison, you finally decided to take the gloves off. I looked at the photo of Catherine on the mantel. I am not just taking the gloves off, I said. I am burning the whole ring down. I went to bed early that night. I slept like a baby. I knew the next day would be loud. I knew there would be screaming. I knew there would be threats. But for the first time in years, I felt respected. Not by them, but by myself. I had drawn a line in the sand. The next morning, the sky over Chicago was the color of a bruised plum. A storm was coming, both meteorological and domestic. I was in the kitchen making toast when I heard the tires screech in the driveway. I didn't need to look out the window to know it was Brody. He drives that Range Rover like he owns the road, aggressive and careless. I heard the car door slam, then another slam. Maya was with him. I unlocked the front door and walked back to the kitchen. I wanted them to come in. I wanted this confrontation to happen on my turf, where the cameras I installed last year would catch every word and every gesture. The front door flew open. They didn't knock. They still had their keys, a privilege I would be revoking very soon. Brody marched into the kitchen, his face red, a vein throbbing in his forehead. He was wearing a designer tracksuit that probably cost more than my monthly grocery bill. Maya was trailing behind him, looking pale and anxious, clutching a Louis Vuitton bag. "What the hell is wrong with you, Garrison?" Brody shouted, slamming his hand onto my granite countertop. I didn't flinch. I continued buttering my toast. "Good morning to you too, Brody. Maya, you look tired. Don't play games with me, old man." Brody yelled, stepping into my personal space. He was trying to intimidate me. He is 6'2" fit from a personal trainer I probably paid for indirectly. I am 5'10" and shrinking. But he forgot that I spent 20 years on loading docks dealing with teamsters who would eat him for breakfast. "The rent," Brody hissed. "The credit cards. You cut everything off. We were at a restaurant last night and the card was declined. Do you have any idea how embarrassing that was?" "I had clients with me, clients," I repeated, calm. Or were they special people? Brody looked like he was going to hit me. Maya stepped forward, tears welling up in her eyes. It was her go-to move. "Dad, please, stop it. You're acting crazy. Why are you doing this? We just got married. We're supposed to be happy. You're ruining our first week as a married couple." I looked at my daughter, really looked at her. I saw the diamond earrings she was wearing. My money bought those. I saw the fresh highlights in her hair. My money paid for that salon visit. "I am ruining it," I asked softly. "You didn't invite me, Maya. I wasn't there. How can I ruin something I wasn't a part of?" Maya faltered. "Dad, we told you. It was small. We didn't want you to feel uncomfortable." "Uncomfortable," I said, tasting the word. "You mean you didn't want your rich friends and Brody's flashy stepfather to see your old boring father in his off-the-rack suit? You wanted the money, but you didn't want the man who earned it." "That's not true," Maya cried, but her eyes shifted away. She couldn't hold my gaze. "It doesn't matter," Brody interrupted, waving his hand dismissively. "We are family. You have an obligation. You promised to help us until my business took off." "I promised to help family," I said, setting down my knife. "But family invites family to weddings. Family doesn't lie about small ceremonies while renting the Peninsula Ballroom. Family doesn't treat their father like an ATM that dispenses cash but isn't allowed in the lobby." Brody sneered. "Oh, so this is about your hurt feelings. You're throwing a tantrum because you didn't get a piece of cake. Grow up, Garrison. You're pathetic. Now fix the transfer. We have bills to pay." I looked at him. I saw the absolute lack of respect, the total conviction that I was weak, that I would fold if he just yelled loud enough. "No," I said. The room went silent. "What did you say?" Brody whispered, his voice dangerous. I said no. "The bank of Dad is closed. Permanently. You want to live in a penthouse, pay for it. You want to drive a Range Rover. Earn it. You want to eat at 5-star restaurants. Get a job that covers the bill." Brody laughed. It was a harsh barking sound. "You can't do that. You know we can't afford that place on our own." "Not yet." "Then move," I said. Brody leaned in close, his face inches from mine. "Listen to me, you old fool. You are going to turn that money back on, because if you don't, you will never see Maya again. You will never see your grandchildren if we ever have them. We will cut you out so completely, you will rot in this house alone, and no one will find you for weeks." Maya gasped. "Brody." "Shut up, Maya," he snapped at her without looking back. "He is scared of being alone. That is his weak spot." He looked back at me, a smirk playing on his lips. "See, I know you. You need us. You have no one else. So be a good little checkbook and pay the rent, or lose your daughter forever. I looked at Maya. She didn't defend me. She didn't tell him to stop. She just stood there looking down at her designer shoes, letting him threaten me. That was the moment the last thread snapped. That was the moment I realized there was nothing left to save. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a piece of paper. It was the credit card statement from the previous month. Who spent $20,000 on flowers on the 24th, I asked, holding it up. Brody blinked, caught off guard by the change of subject. What, the supplementary card? $20,000 at Tiffany's Floral. That was the day of your wedding. You paid for the wedding flowers with my card, without asking. Brody shrugged. So what? It was an emergency. The florist demanded payment up front. You said that card was for emergencies. A wedding you didn't invite me to is not an emergency, I said. That is theft. It's not theft if it's family, Brody yelled. Get out, I said. Brody didn't move. He crossed his arms. No, not until you transfer the money. I picked up my phone. I pressed the speed dial for the sheriff's department. I have a buddy there, Sergeant Miller. We play poker on Thursdays. I am calling the police, I said calmly. I am reporting a trespassing and a theft of $20,000. You have about 5 minutes before the patrol car gets here. Brody's eyes widened. He looked at the phone, then at me. He saw that I wasn't bluffing. For the first time, he saw the man who used to negotiate contracts with union bosses who carried baseball bats. You wouldn't dare, he hissed. I hit the call button. I put it on speaker. Dispatch, this is Garrison Ford at 42 Elm Street. I have intruders in my home who are refusing to leave. One of them has threatened me. Brody's face went pale. He grabbed Maya's arm roughly. Let's go, he is crazy. He has lost his mind. He dragged her toward the door. Before he left, he turned back to me, his finger pointing like a weapon. This isn't over, Garrison. You just made the biggest mistake of your life. We are going to destroy you. Everyone will know you are a senile, abusive old man. You will die alone. He slammed the door so hard the pictures on the wall rattled. I stood in the kitchen listening to the operator asking if I was safe. I am safe, I said. I am just fine. I hung up. My hands were steady. My heart was beating slow and strong. They threatened to cut me off. They threatened to leave me alone. They didn't understand that I had already been alone for years, even when they were in the room. But Brody had made a mistake. He had threatened war. He had threatened to destroy my reputation. He had called me senile. He had just given me the playbook for his own destruction. I walked over to the coffee maker and poured the rest of the pot down the sink. It was cold. I needed to make a fresh pot. I had a lot of work to do. I sat down at my computer and opened a new email to Pendergast. Subject: Operation Eviction. Body proceed with the filings. And Pendergast. Look into the concept of conservatorship abuse. I have a feeling they are going to try to paint me as incompetent to get control of the assets. I want to be ready to trap them when they try. I hit send. I was not just an angry father anymore. I was a general protecting his territory. And the enemy had just walked right into the kill zone. The silence in my house lasted exactly 72 hours after I cut them off. It was a heavy, suffocating silence, the kind that hangs in the air before a tornado touches down. I spent those 3 days in my study watching the security feed of my front gate, waiting for the inevitable explosion. I knew the exact moment the fuse was lit. It was Friday morning. My lawyer, Mr. Pendergast, had served the eviction notice to their penthouse apartment at 9 a.m. sharp. By 9:45, my front gate camera showed Brody's Range Rover smashing through the wooden security arm I had lowered. He didn't even slow down. He just drove right through the splintering wood, a battering ram of entitlement and rage. I was standing in the foyer when the front door burst open. I hadn't locked the deadbolt. I wanted them to come in. I wanted the cameras in the hallway to capture every second of what was about to happen. Brody came through the door like a wild animal. His eyes were bloodshot, rimmed with dark circles that spoke of sleepless nights and panicked calculations. He wasn't wearing his usual designer tracksuit. He was wearing wrinkled jeans and a stained t-shirt, the uniform of a man whose carefully constructed image was disintegrating. Maya was right behind him, her face a mask of tear-streaked mascara clutching her stomach, as if she were in physical pain. "You think you can kick us out?" Brody screamed. His voice wasn't just loud, it was guttural, a raw sound that bounced off the high ceilings of the house he despised, but felt entitled to plunder. "You think you can just throw us on the street like garbage?" I stood perfectly still, my hands clasped behind my back. "I am the landlord." "Brody," I said calmly, "tenants who do not pay rent and who damage the property get evicted. It is standard procedure." "Standard procedure," he roared. He looked around the foyer, his eyes landing on a porcelain vase that sat on the entry table. It was a Ming vase replica, not terribly expensive, but it was one of the few things Catherine, my late wife, had bought during our only trip to Asia. It held fresh lilies, her favorite flower. Brody grabbed it. He didn't just knock it over. He lifted it high above his head, his face twisted in a rictus of hate, and hurled it onto the marble floor. The sound was explosive. Porcelain shattered into 1,000 jagged shards. Water and flowers scattered across the floor like blood and broken limbs. The noise echoed in the silence that followed a violent punctuation mark to his anger. "That is what I think of your standard procedure," he hissed, stepping over the debris, crushing a lily under his boot. "You are destroying my life, old man. You are humiliating me. Do you know what my business partners will think when they find out I am being evicted? Do you know what this does to my credit?" I looked at the shattered vase. I felt a cold, sharp anger slice through me, but I kept my face impassive. I watched him trample the flowers Catherine loved. I realized then that he wasn't just a leech. He was a vandal. He destroyed beautiful things simply because he could not possess them. "I am not destroying your life," I said, my voice dropping an octave. "I am simply refusing to finance the lie you are living." Brody lunged forward, but Maya stepped between us. She grabbed his arm, pulling him back, then turned to face me. This was the second wave of the attack. Brody was the brute force, but Maya was the emotional assassin. She looked at me with wide, pleading eyes, her hands pressing harder against her midsection. She took a ragged breath, performing the role of the victim with Oscar-worthy commitment. "Dad, please," she sobbed, her voice trembling. "You have to stop this. You are stressing me out so much. My heart is racing. I can't breathe." She stumbled slightly, leaning against the wall for support. "You don't understand what you are doing," she whispered. "I didn't want to tell you like this. I wanted it to be a surprise. I wanted to tell you when things were happy." She looked up at me, letting a single tear roll down her cheek. "I am pregnant, Dad." The words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Brody stopped panting. He looked at her, then at me, a smug satisfaction creeping onto his face. He knew this was the ace in the hole. The grandchild card. The one thing that brings an old man to his knees. Maya continued, her voice gaining strength as she saw me hesitate. "I am 6 weeks along, but the doctor said it is a high-risk pregnancy. I need calm. I need stability. And you are terrifying me. You are making me so stressed I feel cramps, Dad. You could make me lose the baby. Is that what you want? Do you want to kill your own grandchild just to prove a point about money?" For a moment, the world tilted. A grandchild. A part of Catherine. A new life. My heart leaped with an instinctual biological hope. But then my logistics brain kicked in. The part of me that spent 40 years analyzing data, looking for discrepancies, spotting the fraud in the manifest. I looked at Maya. I looked at her flat stomach. I thought about the wedding photos from 5 days ago. I remembered the glass of champagne she was holding in every single picture. I remembered the waiter topping it off. I remembered the video Brody posted on his story of them doing tequila shots at the after-party. 6 weeks pregnant. High risk. Yet she was drinking like a sailor less than a week ago. The hope in my chest died, replaced by a cold, hard knot of disgust. She wasn't pregnant. She was using a hypothetical life, a non-existent child, as a hostage to negotiate a lease renewal. It was the lowest, most vile tactic I had ever witnessed. I didn't say a word. I turned my back on them and walked into my study. "Where are you going?" Brody shouted. "We are talking to you. Don't you walk away from your daughter when she is telling you she might miscarry." I walked to my desk. I opened the top drawer. I pulled out a single sheet of paper. It was a credit card statement I had printed out that morning. I had highlighted one specific transaction in neon yellow ink. I walked back into the foyer. I stopped 3 feet from them, avoiding the broken porcelain. I held the paper up. "You want to talk about stress, Maya?" I asked softly. "You want to talk about expenses? You want to talk about the future of this family?" I handed her the paper. "Explain this." Maya took the paper, her hands shaking. She looked at the highlighted line. Her face went pale, draining of all color until she looked like a ghost. Brody snatched the paper from her hand. "What is this garbage?" he sneered. He read the line out loud. "Tiffany's Floral Designs, $20,000. Date of transaction, October 24th. He looked up, confused. "So what?" "It's flowers. For the wedding. The flowers you weren't invited to see." I stepped closer. "October 24th, I repeated. "That was the day of your wedding, Brody. The card was swiped at 8 a.m. Do you know where I was at 8 a.m.? I was sitting in this house drinking coffee, waiting for a phone call that never came. I was wondering if I should put on my suit, just in case." I pointed a finger at the paper. "That is my emergency card, Maya. The one I gave you for medical emergencies, for car accidents, for life or death situations. You used it to pay for $20,000 worth of imported orchids and white roses for a party I was explicitly excluded from." Maya couldn't speak. She stared at the floor. "You stole $20,000 from me on the morning of your wedding," I said, my voice rising for the first time. "You stole it to decorate a room I wasn't allowed to enter. And now you come into my house, you break my wife's vase, and you lie to my face about a pregnancy." Brody stepped in front of Maya, puffing out his chest. "It wasn't theft. We are family. Your money is supposed to be for us, and she isn't lying. How dare you call her a liar?" I looked Brody in the eye. I didn't blink. "I know she is lying, Brody, because I saw the photos. I saw the champagne. I saw the tequila. Unless your wife has decided to give my grandchild fetal alcohol syndrome before it is even born, there is no baby." The silence that followed was absolute. Maya let out a small choked sound. The gaslighting had failed. The narrative had collapsed. "That $20,000 is considered grand larceny," I said, my voice calm again. "I have already filed the fraud report with American Express. They are opening an investigation. And since you swiped the card, Maya, the police will be coming to talk to you." Brody's face turned a shade of purple I had never seen before. "You reported your own daughter for fraud." "She committed fraud," I said. "I just reported the crime." I pointed to the door. "Get out. Get out of my house before I add vandalism and destruction of property to the list of charges I am handing to the sheriff." Brody looked at the broken vase. He looked at Maya, who was now weeping silently, real tears of terror this time. He realized he had overplayed his hand. He realized that the man standing in front of him wasn't the soft, lonely retiree he thought he could bully. He grabbed Maya's arm. "Let's go," he spat. "He is insane. He is a bitter, lonely old man who wants us to be miserable just like him." He dragged her toward the door. As they stepped out into the rain, Brody turned back one last time. You are going to regret this, Garrison. When you are dying in a hospital bed, and no one is there to hold your hand. Remember this moment. Remember that you chose $20,000 over your own blood. I watched them get into the car. I watched them speed away. I closed the door and locked it. I leaned my forehead against the cool wood. I looked down at the shattered vase. I crouched down and picked up a piece of the blue and white porcelain. It was sharp enough to cut. I didn't choose money over blood, I whispered to the empty house. I chose dignity over a parasite. I stood up. I went to the kitchen to get the broom. I had a mess to clean up. And after that, I had a call to make to the forensic accountant. If they were willing to steal $20,000 for flowers. I needed to know what else they had taken. The violent visit hadn't scared me. It had clarified everything. The war was no longer cold. It was hot. And I was just getting started. You are delusional, Garrison, Brody spat, tossing the credit card statement onto the floor next to the shattered remains of my wife's vase. He looked at me with a mix of pity and disgust, shaking his head, as if he were dealing with an unruly child. You really don't remember, do you? This is exactly what we were afraid of. You authorized that charge. We were at dinner 3 weeks ago. You had that second glass of wine you shouldn't be drinking with your blood pressure medication. You told Maya she should have the best flowers in Chicago. You handed her the card yourself. I stared at him, marveling at the audacity of the lie. It was a clumsy attempt at gaslighting, the kind of manipulation a teenager tries on a parent, but delivered with the confidence of a sociopath. He was trying to rewrite history in real time, banking on the stereotype of the forgetful senior citizen. But he forgot that I kept a daily log. I have kept a log every day since 1982. I knew exactly where I was 3 weeks ago. I was at the dentist getting a crown replaced, and then I was home alone eating leftover lasagna and watching a documentary on the Panama Canal. There was no dinner. There was no wine. And there was certainly no authorization for $20,000 worth of hydrangeas. I did not have dinner with you 3 weeks ago, Brody. I said, my voice steady. The last time we ate together was Thanksgiving, and you spent the entire meal texting under the table. Brody laughed, a harsh barking sound. See, you are confused. Your mind is going, Garrison. It is sad, really. This is why we need to step in. You can't handle your finances anymore. You are throwing around accusations because you can't keep your own life straight. He took a step closer, invading my personal space again. His cologne was overpowering, a musk that smelled like desperation and expensive department stores. Listen to me very carefully, he hissed, leaning down so his face was inches from mine. If you don't turn the money back on, if you don't fix this mess you created with the landlord, you are going to regret it. You think you are tough, and you are just a lonely old man in a big empty house. He gestured around the foyer, his hand sweeping through the air. Look at this place. It is a mausoleum, and you are the ghost haunting it. If you cut us off, you are cutting off your only lifeline to the world. Who is going to check on you when you fall down the stairs? Who is going to visit you in the hospital when your heart finally gives out? Maya. He looked back at my daughter, who was still sniffling by the door, avoiding my eyes. Maya won't come. I will make sure of that. If you don't pay up, you cease to exist to us. You will rot in this house, Garrison. You will die alone in the dark, and no one will find you until the smell bothers the neighbors. Is that what you want? Is $20,000 worth dying alone for? The cruelty of his words was breathtaking. He wasn't just threatening my safety, he was weaponizing my deepest fear. He knew that since Catherine died, the silence in the house was my constant enemy. He was betting that the terror of solitude would outweigh my dignity. But as I looked at him, at the sweat beading on his forehead and the manic glint in his eyes, I didn't feel fear. I felt clarity. This wasn't family. This was a hostage situation. And I do not negotiate with terrorists. I would rather die alone in this house 1,000 times over than spend one more minute buying the affection of a parasite, I said. I walked past him to the front door and threw it open. The wind had picked up, blowing rain into the foyer, wetting the expensive hardwood floors. "Get out," I commanded, "and do not come back. If I see your car in my driveway again, I will have it towed and impounded." Brody sneered, but he backed away. He grabbed Maya's hand and pulled her roughly toward the door. She looked back at me for a split second, her eyes wide and fearful, but she didn't say a word. She didn't apologize. She didn't tell him to stop. She just let him drag her out into the rain, choosing her captor over her father yet again. "You are making a big mistake," Garrison Brody yelled over the sound of the wind. "You are going to beg us to come back." "You are going to beg," I slammed the door in his face. I threw the deadbolt. Then I engaged the secondary security lock I had installed years ago, but never used. I leaned against the door, taking a deep breath. My hands were trembling not from fear, but from the adrenaline of the confrontation. I felt dirty, as if their presence had left a film of grime on the walls of my home. I went into the kitchen and poured myself a glass of water. I needed to calm down. I needed to think. I had to call Pendergast and tell him about the threat. The gaslighting about my memory was a clear signal. They were going to try to paint me as incompetent. They were going to build a case that I was senile to get control of the money. I needed to get ahead of it. I drank the water and walked to the window to watch them leave. I expected to see the taillights of the Range Rover fading down the street. But the car was gone. The driveway was empty. That was strange. Brody usually made a show of peeling out, leaving tire marks on the pavement as a final act of defiance. To leave quietly wasn't his style. A sudden, uneasy feeling settled in my stomach. My instincts, honed by years of managing risks, flared up. Something was wrong. I put down the glass and walked to the side door that led to the garage. I needed to check the perimeter. I grabbed the heavy flashlight I kept by the door, more for a weapon than for light, and stepped out into the garage. My truck, my beloved 6-year-old Ford F-150, was parked in its usual spot. It was the vehicle I used to drive Catherine to her chemo appointments. It was the truck I used to move Maya into her college dorm. It was more than a machine, it was a repository of my life's work. I pressed the garage door opener. The heavy door rumbled up, revealing the gray, rainy afternoon. I walked around the truck, doing my routine inspection. It was a habit I never broke. When I got to the rear driver's side tire, I stopped. The tire wasn't just flat. It was shredded. A long, jagged gash ran vertically through the sidewall. The rubber gaped open like a wound. I knelt down, touching the edge of the tear. It was clean, precise. This wasn't a nail or a piece of glass. This was a knife. I stood up and checked the front tire. Same thing. A deep, violent slash through the rubber. I walked around the truck. All 4 tires. Every single one of them had been butchered. I stood in the open garage, the rain misting against my face, looking at my crippled vehicle. This wasn't just vandalism. This was a message. It was a physical manifestation of the violence Brody was holding back. He couldn't hit me, not yet, so he stabbed the thing he knew I relied on. He wanted to trap me. He wanted to make sure I couldn't leave, couldn't go to the bank, couldn't drive to my lawyer's office. He wanted to ground me in the house he claimed I would die in. I felt a cold rage settle over me, heavier and darker than before. The argument in the foyer had been a family dispute. This was criminal. This was war. I took my phone out of my pocket and snapped photos of each tire. I took close-ups of the slash marks. I took a wide shot of the truck sitting on its rims. Then I called Pendergast. "Don't file the eviction notice tomorrow," I said when he answered. He paused. "Garrison, are you getting cold feet?" "No," I said, staring at the ruined rubber. "File it today. And call the police. I want to file a report for criminal mischief and destruction of property." "What happened?" Pendergast asked, his voice sharpening. "They slashed my tires, Pendergast. All 4 of them. They left me stranded. There was a silence on the line. Then Pendergast spoke, his voice low and dangerous. That changes things, Garrison. That is an act of aggression. If he is willing to use a knife on your truck, we have to assume he is willing to use it on other things. We need to get a restraining order, immediately. Do it, I said. And Pendergast. Yes. Add the cost of 4 new all-terrain tires to the lawsuit. I want him to pay for every single inch of rubber he destroyed. I hung up the phone. I walked back into the house and locked the door from the garage. I went to the security panel and armed the system to the highest setting. I wasn't afraid. I was focused. Brody thought he had trapped me. He thought he had cut off my legs. But he forgot that I didn't need a truck to destroy him. I had a phone, I had a lawyer, and I had the truth. I went to the kitchen and made a fresh pot of coffee. It was going to be a long night. I had to pull the security footage from the driveway cameras. I needed to find the exact moment he pulled the knife. I needed to see his face when he did it. Because when I stood in court and watched him go to prison, I wanted to remember exactly why I put him there. He had declared war on the wrong old man. And now he was going to learn that I had more ammunition than he could ever imagine. The tow truck arrived at 8 in the morning to haul my crippled Ford away. It was a spectacle. The hydraulic whine of the lift and the flashing amber lights cut through the gray drizzle of the Chicago morning, drawing eyes to my driveway. In a quiet suburb like this, a flatbed truck is an event. Usually my neighbors would wave or walk over to ask what happened, offering a ride to the mechanic or a cup of coffee. I have lived on Elm Street for 15 years. I know the names of their dogs. I know who overwaters their lawn and who cheats at block party trivia. But this morning the street was different. It felt hostile. I stood on my porch watching the driver hook the chains to the undercarriage of my truck. Across the street, Mrs. Gable, a woman I have exchanged Christmas cards with for a decade, was standing by her mailbox. Our eyes met. I raised a hand to wave. She didn't wave back. She pulled her cardigan tighter around herself, gave me a look of pity mixed with genuine fear, and hurried back inside her house, locking the door audibly. It wasn't just her. Mr. Henderson, 2 doors down, was washing his car. He usually walks over to talk about the Bears game. Today, he turned his back to me the moment I stepped outside, aggressively scrubbing a spot on his hood. The air felt thick with something unsaid. It wasn't just the rain. It was the heavy, suffocating weight of gossip. I went back inside and poured a cup of coffee. My hands were steady, but my mind was racing. I needed intel. I unlocked my iPad and opened the neighborhood Facebook group. I rarely check it. It is usually just complaints about dog walkers leaving messes or debates about garbage pickup schedules. But today, the top post pinned by the moderator had over 200 comments. It was written by Brody. The post was a masterpiece of fiction. It was titled, "A Heartbreaking Request for Patience and Understanding." It read, "Dear neighbors, as many of you know, my wife Maya and I have been caring for her father Garrison for the past few years. It breaks my heart to share this, but his condition has deteriorated rapidly in the last few months. The doctors suspect early-onset Alzheimer's with a tendency toward aggressive outbursts, a condition known as sundowning. Yesterday, he had a violent episode. He became confused and attacked us, destroying property and threatening Maya, who is in a delicate state. We are doing everything we can to keep him safe and at home, but if you see him wandering or acting erratically, please do not approach him. He can be dangerous. We ask for your prayers during this difficult time as we navigate the legal steps to get him the professional help he desperately needs." I stared at the screen, the likes, the sad face reactions, the comments pouring in. Poor Maya. You are such a good son-in-law for taking care of him. It is so sad when the mind goes. I saw him yelling yesterday. It was terrifying. He had weaponized my neighbors against me. He had taken the violence he committed, the VOS he broke, the threats he made, and he had projected them onto me. He had painted me as a senile, violent monster, and himself as the saintly martyr. It was a preemptive strike. He knew I would call the police about the tires. Now if I told anyone he did it, they would just see it as the paranoid ramblings of a man losing his mind. I took a screenshot of the post. Then I took screenshots of the comments. I printed them out and added them to the file. I didn't comment. I didn't engage. Engaging would only make me look defensive and unstable. I was filing the papers when the doorbell rang. It wasn't the rhythmic ring of a friend. It was the sharp, authoritative press of official business. I checked the camera. A man and a woman in business casual attire stood on the porch. They wore lanyards with laminated ID cards. They weren't police, they carried clipboards. Adult Protective Services. Brody hadn't just posted on Facebook. He had made the call. He had reported me as a danger to myself. I took a deep breath. This was the test. If I got angry, if I yelled, if I acted like the man Brody described in his post, they would take me away for a 72-hour psychiatric hold. That would give Brody 3 days to empty the house and change the locks. I smoothed my shirt. I opened the door. "Good morning," I said, my voice calm and measured. "Can I help you?" The woman stepped forward. "Mr. Ford, I am Sarah Jenkins, and this is Mark Davis. We are with the Illinois Department on Aging Adult Protective Services. We received a report concerning your welfare and the safety of your home environment. We need to come in and speak with you, of course," I said, stepping aside. "Please come in. Would you like some coffee? I just made a fresh pot. It is a Colombian blend." They exchanged a look. They were expecting a hoarder's nest or a man screaming at invisible enemies. Instead, they walked into a pristine foyer with gleaming hardwood floors and the smell of high-quality coffee. "We appreciate the offer, but we just need to ask a few questions," Sarah said, her eyes scanning the room. She was looking for holes in the drywall piles of trash or the smell of urine. She found nothing but polished oak and order. "We received a report stating that there was a violent altercation here yesterday," Mark said, his pen poised over his clipboard. "The report alleges that you became disoriented, destroyed furniture, and threatened family members with physical harm. It also states that you are currently off your medication and may be a danger to yourself." I sat down in my armchair and gestured for them to take the sofa. "I understand," I said. "That is a very serious allegation. Did the report happen to come from a Mr. Brody Miller or a Mrs. Maya Miller?" "We cannot disclose the source of the report," Sarah said automatically. I nodded. "I understand. However, I believe I can clarify the situation." I reached for the remote control on the coffee table. I didn't turn on the TV. I switched the input to the security system. The large screen on the wall flickered to life, showing a grid of camera feeds. I selected the file dated yesterday, marked Foyer Event. I pressed play. On the screen, high-definition video showed the front door bursting open. It showed Brody storming in his face, twisted in rage. It showed Maya crying. It showed me standing still, hands behind my back. And then it showed Brody picking up the Ming vase. It showed him smashing it on the floor while screaming that I was destroying his life. It showed him threatening me. It showed him dragging Maya out the door. The audio was crisp. Every curse word, every threat, every sound of shattering porcelain filled the living room. I paused the video on the frame where Brody was screaming in my face. "As you can see," I said softly, "there was indeed a violent altercation. But I was not the aggressor. I was the victim of a home invasion and destruction of property by my son-in-law, who is currently upset because I stopped paying his credit card bills." Sarah and Mark stared at the screen. Mark stopped writing. Sarah's mouth was slightly open. I stood up and walked to my desk. I picked up a file folder. "Here are the results of my physical from last week, conducted by Dr. Sterling at Northwestern. It includes a cognitive assessment. I scored 30 out of 30. Here is my medication log. I take 1 pill for blood pressure and a multivitamin. I have never missed a dose. And here I said, handing them the printout of the Facebook post is the reason you are here. This is a coordinated smear campaign designed to discredit me so they can gain control of my assets. Sarah took the papers. She read the doctor's note. She looked at the Facebook post. Then she looked at me. The professional suspicion in her eyes vanished, replaced by a dawn of realization and worse pity. "Mr. Ford," she said, her voice softer. This is very disturbing. Your son-in-law appears extremely volatile." "He is," I agreed, "which is why I had my tires slashed last night. I can show you the police report for that as well if you like." I spent the next hour walking them through the evidence. I showed them the ledgers. I showed them the emails. I showed them the forensic accounting of the money I had given them. By the time they left, they weren't looking at me as a ward of the state. They were looking at me as a man under siege. "We are going to close this case as unfounded," Sarah said at the door. "And Mr. Ford, I would recommend getting that restraining order immediately. This escalation is dangerous." I watched them drive away. I had won the skirmish. I had repelled the invasion. But as I looked at the Facebook post again, at the hundreds of neighbors who now believed I was a violent, demented old man, I knew the damage was done. Brody had poisoned the well. He had taken my community, my sanctuary, and turned it against me. I could prove my sanity to the authorities, but proving it to a whisper network was a different battle. I went back to my computer. I opened the file for the LLC that owned their apartment building. If he wanted to play the game of public reputation, I would play it too. But I wouldn't use rumors. I would use the public record. I drafted an email to the condo board of the building where they lived. As the owner of the unit, I had a responsibility to report illegal activities. And I happened to know, thanks to the forensic accountant's preliminary report, that Brody was running a high stakes poker game out of the penthouse on Tuesday nights. I hit send. Let's see how he handles a smear campaign when the police are the ones knocking on his door with a warrant. The envelope that arrived on a Tuesday afternoon was heavy thick with the weight of legal intent. It was delivered by a process server who wouldn't look me in the eye, a young man who mumbled an apology as he handed over the packet that was meant to end my life as a free man. I took it into the kitchen, the same kitchen where Brody had smashed my wife's vase just days before, and laid the documents out on the island. The bold capitalized letters at the top of the first page stopped my breath in my throat. Emergency petition for temporary conservatorship of the person and estate of Garrison Ford. I stared at the words, feeling a cold numbness spread from my fingertips up my arms. Conservatorship. It was the nuclear option. It was the legal mechanism designed to protect those who could no longer protect themselves, the elderly, with advanced dementia, the comatose, the profoundly disabled. But in the hands of my son-in-law, it was a weapon. They weren't just trying to sue me for money or evict me from my own life emotionally. They were trying to strip me of my civil rights. They were trying to declare me a non-person, a ward of the state under their benevolence, granting them total legal control over every dollar I owned, every medical decision I made, and even who I was allowed to see. I turned the page, my hands shaking, not from age but from a rage so pure, it felt like ice. I needed to see the evidence. You cannot just walk into a court and claim a man is incompetent without proof. You need a medical opinion. And there it was, attached as Exhibit A, a sworn affidavit from a Dr. Aris Thorne. I read the doctor's statement with a growing sense of horror. Dr. Thorne claimed to have examined me on the 12th of last month. He described a patient who was disoriented, aggressive, and unable to recall basic facts like the current year or the president's name. He diagnosed me with advanced frontotemporal dementia, a condition marked by drastic personality changes and a lack of inhibition. He wrote that my recent financial decisions, specifically the cutting off of support to my dependents, were classic symptoms of the disease, proof that I was no longer capable of managing my substantial assets. The lies were breathtaking in their detail. He described a tremor in my hands that I do not have. He described a shuffling gait that belongs to a man 20 years my senior. He even quoted me as saying things I would never say, rambling about government conspiracies and hidden treasures. I have never met a Dr. Aris Thorne in my life. The date he claimed to have examined me was a Tuesday. I checked my log. On that Tuesday, I was at the DMV renewing my license, passing the vision and written tests with a perfect score. I had a government-stamped timestamp to prove I was nowhere near this doctor's office. Brody hadn't just exaggerated. He had purchased a diagnosis. He had found a corrupt medical professional willing to sign away a man's freedom for a fee. This wasn't just a family dispute anymore. This was a criminal conspiracy involving medical malpractice and perjury. I didn't scream. I didn't throw the papers. I picked up the phone and dialed Pendergast. "I need to see you immediately," I said. They dropped the bomb. 30 minutes later, I was sitting in Pendergast's office, the leather chair cool against my back. Pendergast read the petition in silence. His face, usually a mask of professional detachment, darkened with every page he turned. When he got to the doctor's affidavit, he let out a low whistle. Thorne Pendergast muttered, tapping the paper. "I know this guy. He is a concierge psychiatrist for the Gold Coast crowd. He usually writes prescriptions for rich housewives addicted to Xanax. I didn't think he was stupid enough to fabricate a dementia diagnosis for a competency hearing. This is risky, Garrison. Very risky." "They are desperate," I said. "They are drowning in debt, and they need access to the accounts before the eviction goes through. They think if they get the emergency order, they can freeze the eviction and drain the trust." Pendergast looked at me over his glasses. "You understand what this means, right? If the judge grants this even temporarily, your accounts are frozen. Your credit cards stop working. You can't even hire a lawyer without their permission. They become your legal guardians. They become your parents." I looked out the window at the Chicago skyline. I imagined Brody sitting in my study drinking my scotch, signing checks with my name while I sat in a room somewhere medicated into compliance. "We have to fight this," Pendergast said, reaching for his notepad. "We file a motion to dismiss. We submit your real medical records. We subpoena this Dr. Thorne and tear him apart on the stand. I can have this thrown out in a week." "No," I said. Pendergast stopped writing. He looked at me confused. "No, Garrison. This is your freedom we are talking about. You don't play games with a conservatorship." "I don't want it thrown out," I said, turning back to him. "If we get it thrown out, they will just try something else. They will claim I am physically abusive. They will plant drugs in my house. They won't stop until they win or until they are in jail. I want to end this, Pendergast. I want to crush them so completely they never crawl out of the hole." I leaned forward. "I want a meeting." "A meeting?" Pendergast asked. "Tell their lawyer I am shaken. Tell them the petition terrified me. Tell them I am having moments of clarity and I realize I might need help. Tell them I am willing to discuss a settlement, a power of attorney arrangement, to avoid the humiliation of a public court battle." Pendergast narrowed his eyes. "You want to trap them?" "I want them in a room," I said. "I want Brody and Maya and their lawyer sitting across from me. I want them to feel like they have won. Because when people think they have won, when they think the enemy is defeated and broken, they get arrogant. They get sloppy. They say things they shouldn't say." I stood up and paced the room. "I am going to give them the performance of a lifetime. I am going to be the confused, tired old man they claim I am. I will wear my old gardening clothes. I will forget my glasses. I will let my hands shake. I will ask them to help me. And while they are gloating, while they are explaining exactly how they plan to take over my life, I will have a recording device running in my pocket. And you, Pendergast, will be there to witness it." Pendergast leaned back in his chair, a slow smile spreading across his face. It was a shark's smile. "That is dangerous, Garrison. If you oversell it, Their lawyer might try to have you committed right there. That is a risk I am willing to take, I said, because I know something they don't. I know about the debt. I know about the gambling. I know that Brody isn't doing this for my well-being. He is doing it because he owes $500,000 to people who break kneecaps for a living. He is on a ticking clock. If I dangle the keys to the kingdom in front of him, he will jump for them. He won't question why it is so easy. He is too desperate. Pendergast nodded slowly. Okay. We play the rope-a-dope. We let them punch themselves out. I will set it up. Tomorrow afternoon. My conference room. I will tell them you are ready to sign a limited power of attorney if they drop the petition. Make it a full power of attorney, I corrected. Make the bait irresistible. Tell them I am ready to sign over the trust management. Tell them I just want to rest. Pendergast picked up his phone. You are a scary man, Garrison Ford. I picked up the fake medical report and looked at Dr. Thorne's signature one last time. I am not scary, I said. I am just a father who finally realized he raised a wolf, and now I have to put the wolf down. I left his office with a plan. I went home and dug through my closet. I found a sweater with a small moth hole in the sleeve. I found a pair of pants that were slightly too big, making me look frail. I practiced my posture in the mirror, slumping my shoulders, dulling the sharpness in my eyes. I looked at the reflection of the old, defeated man in the mirror. It was a costume. Underneath the steel was harder than ever. They wanted a senile old man. I would give them one. I would give them exactly what they wanted, right up until the moment I snapped the trap shut on their necks. The conservatorship was their nuclear option, but they forgot one thing about nukes. If you drop one, you better make sure you are not standing in the blast zone. And Brody was standing right at ground zero. The office of Brody's lawyer was located on the 42nd floor of a glass tower in the Loop, a place designed to make anyone earning less than 7 figures feel small. I wore the oversized cardigan I had dug out of the back of my closet, the one with the fraying cuffs and the smell of mothballs. I didn't shave that morning. I let my posture collapse, curving my spine into the shape of a man beaten down by the weight of his own years. I shuffled when I walked, dragging my heels on the plush carpet, my hand trembling slightly as I reached for the door handle. Pendergast walked beside me carrying a battered briefcase instead of his usual Italian leather satchel. He was playing his part perfectly, looking weary and defeated, the image of a lawyer who knew his client was a lost cause. We entered the conference room. It was cold, air-conditioned to a temperature that chilled the sweat on my neck. Brody and Maya were already there, sitting on the opposite side of a table that looked like a slab of black ice. Their lawyer sat at the head of the table. He was a man with a predatory smile and a suit that fit too tightly, the kind of attorney who chased ambulances before he started chasing inheritances. Brody didn't stand up when I entered. He leaned back in his chair, his arms crossed, a look of smug satisfaction plastered across his face. He looked at my sweater, at my unshaven face, at the way I lowered myself into the chair with a groan of exertion. I saw the tension leave his shoulders. He bought it. He saw exactly what he wanted to see, a broken, confused old man ready to surrender. Maya wouldn't meet my eyes. She was scrolling through her phone, her thumb moving rhythmically, dissociating from the reality of what they were about to do. Let's get this over with. Brody said, his voice loud in the quiet room. We have a schedule to keep. Brody's lawyer pushed a thick stack of documents across the table. It slid silently over the polished surface, stopping inches from my hands. Mr. Ford, the lawyer said, his voice slick with false sympathy. These are the documents we discussed with Mr. Pendergast. This is a revocable living trust agreement, along with a durable power of attorney for both finances and health care. Essentially, this transfers the title of all your assets, real estate bank accounts, and investment portfolios into the trust. And who controls the trust? I asked, my voice cracking. I sounded weak. I sounded scared. It was the best performance of my life. The lawyer smiled. Your daughter Maya and her husband Brody will serve as co-trustees. They will have full discretionary power to manage the assets for your benefit. For my benefit, I repeated, looking at the papers. The legal jargon was dense, but I knew what it meant. It meant they could drain the accounts, sell the house, and liquidate my portfolio without asking me for permission. It was a license to steal, notarized and bound in leather. I reached into my pocket, my fingers brushing against the cold metal of the digital recorder. I pressed the record button. A tiny vibration confirmed it was running. I don't understand, I stammered, looking at Brody. Why do you need everything? Why can't I just keep my checking account? I need to buy groceries. I need to pay for my gardening. Brody sighed, an exaggerated sound of impatience. Because you can't handle it anymore, Garrison, he said, leaning forward. Look at you. You are a mess. You are forgetting things. You are aggressive. We are doing this to protect you from yourself. If you keep control, you are going to lose everything. You will be destitute in a year. I looked at him, letting my lower lip tremble. But $50,000, Brody. I have $50,000 in savings. That should be enough for a few years, right? Brody scoffed. 50,000. You have millions, old man. We know about the logistics sale. We know about the LLCs. Did you think you could hide that from us forever? We did our homework. And we are not going to let you squander our inheritance on whatever it is you spend money on. There it was. The first admission. He knew about the money. He wasn't doing this for my health. He was doing it for the millions. But if I sign this, I whispered, leaning in close, playing the terrified victim. What happens to me? Where will I live? You kicked me out of my own house in your petition. Maya finally looked up. Her eyes were cold, devoid of the warmth I used to see when she was a child. You can't stay in that big house, Dad, she said, her voice flat. It is too much for you. We found a place, a facility. It is very safe. They have nurses. They have a schedule. A facility, I echoed. You mean a nursing home? It is an assisted living center, Brody corrected sharply. A state facility. It is efficient. They will make sure you take your meds, and frankly, it is all you need. You don't need a 4-bedroom colonial to watch TV all day. I felt a spike of adrenaline. A state facility. They weren't even planning to put me in a nice home. They were going to dump me in the cheapest warehouse they could find so they could keep more of the profit. But the money, I said, pushing a little harder. If I have millions like you say, why do I have to go to a state facility? Why can't I hire a nurse at home? Brody slammed his hand on the table. The sound made me jump, but this time the flinch was calculated. Because that money is not for nurses, he shouted. Jesus, you are selfish. That money is for the future. It is for us. We have debts to pay. We have a life to build. You had your turn. You lived your life. Now it is our turn. He stood up and walked around the table, looming over me. Just sign the damn papers, Garrison. Stop dragging this out. You are going to sign it, and then you are going to get in the car, and we are going to drive you to the center. That is the deal. You sign, and we don't have you declared mentally incompetent in open court. We don't drag your name through the mud. We don't tell the world you attacked your pregnant daughter. I looked at the pen he was holding out to me. I looked at Pendergast, who was staring at his shoes, shoulders slumped. Pregnant, I murmured. That's right. The baby. I have to think about the baby. I looked at Maya. If I sign this, will there be enough for the baby? I asked. I want my grandchild to be safe. I want to make sure the baby has a college fund. Maya rolled her eyes. She actually rolled her eyes. She looked at Brody, then back at me with a look of pure annoyance. Oh my God, Dad, stop it, she snapped. Stop what I asked, worrying about the baby. There is no baby, she yelled. The room went silent. Even their lawyer looked uncomfortable. What I whispered. There is no baby. Maya repeated, her voice dripping with venom. I made it up. I had to say something to get you to stop acting crazy. I knew you would only listen if you thought there was a grandchild involved. It was a leverage play, Dad. Basic negotiation. She crossed her arms, looking defiant. So stop whining about a college fund for a kid that doesn't exist and just sign the paper so we can get on with our lives. I felt a chill run through me. It was the final confirmation, the final nail in the coffin of my fatherhood. She hadn't just lied to protect herself. She had lied to manipulate me, to weaponize my love for a hypothetical child, and she felt absolutely no remorse about it. It was a business tactic to her, a leverage play. I looked at Brody. He was grinning. He didn't care that she admitted it. He just wanted the signature. You heard her, old man, Brody said. No baby, no legacy, just you, us, and a whole lot of money that you are too old to enjoy. You can't take it with you to the grave, Garrison. And let's be honest, you are standing with one foot in it already. So sign the paper. Let us take care of it. I looked down at the document. The trust transfer deed. It was irrevocable. Once signed, legal title passed to them. But I knew the law. And I knew that a signature obtained under duress, under threat of institutionalization, and based on fraudulent medical claims was voidable. But more importantly, I knew that signing this document would be the ultimate piece of evidence. It would be the act that sealed their intent. Attempted grand larceny, conspiracy to defraud, elder abuse. I reached out with a trembling hand and took the pen. I just want to rest, I whispered. I don't want to fight anymore. Good, Brody said, his eyes hungry. Sign right there, next to the blue tab. I put the pen to the paper. I made my hand shake violently, scrawling a signature that looked like a spider web of fear. I signed the power of attorney. I signed the trust transfer. Brody snatched the papers away the second the ink hit the page. He didn't check to see if I was okay. He didn't offer me a glass of water. He held the documents up like a trophy, a feral grin splitting his face. Done, he said. Finally. He looked at his lawyer. File these immediately. I want access to the accounts by morning. I have a transfer to make. I stood up slowly, leaning heavily on the table. Can I go home now, I asked. Just for one last night before the facility. Brody looked at me. He had what he wanted. He could afford to be magnanimous for 12 hours. Fine, he said dismissively. Go home. Pack a bag. Small bag. You won't have much room in the room you are going to. We will pick you up at 8 a.m. Don't lock the door. It is our house now anyway. He turned his back on me, already dialing a number on his phone, probably his bookie or the shark he owed money to. Maya stood up and gathered her purse. She didn't say goodbye. She just walked out the door without looking back. I walked out of the office with Pendergast. We walked in silence to the elevator. We rode down 42 floors without saying a word. When the elevator doors opened in the lobby, I stepped out. I straightened my back. I rolled my shoulders, shedding the posture of the old man. I took a deep breath of the lobby air. Pendergast looked at me. His eyes were shining. Did you get it? He asked. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the recorder. The red light was still blinking. I stopped the recording. I got everything I said, my voice strong and steady. The fake pregnancy. The threat of the state facility. The admission that they want the money for themselves. The acknowledgement that I have millions. And the coercion to sign. Pendergast nodded. That recording is a nuclear bomb, Garrison. In Illinois, elder abuse includes financial exploitation and intimidation. We have them on tape admitting to a conspiracy to defraud you of your estate while holding the threat of involuntary commitment over your head. What do we do now? Pendergast asked. Do we go to the police? Not yet, I said. We have one more stop. I looked at my watch. It was 4 p.m. Brody said he wanted access to the accounts by morning. He is going to try to move the money the second the bank opens. I want to make sure that when he tries to log in, he doesn't just find a zero balance. I want him to find something else. What Pendergast asked. I want him to find out that the trust he just forced me to sign over doesn't own a single dime. I want him to find out that while he was busy buying a fake doctor, I was busy moving every single asset into a new irrevocable trust in South Dakota with a corporate trustee that answers only to me. I smiled a cold, hard smile. He has a piece of paper that gives him control over an empty shell. He just stole a ghost Pendergast. And tomorrow morning, when he realizes he has been played, when the loan sharks realize he can't pay them, and when the police knock on his door with the warrant for credit card fraud, that is when the real show begins. Let's go, I said, walking toward the revolving doors. I have a date with the forensic accountant. We need to finalize the damage report before the arrest warrants are issued. The negotiation is over. Now the execution begins. We returned to Pendergast's office, the adrenaline of the performance fading into a cold, hard resolve. The sun had set over Chicago, turning the skyline into a jagged row of illuminated teeth. Pendergast loosened his tie and poured 2 glasses of amber liquid from a crystal decanter. He didn't ask if I wanted one. He knew I needed it. He slid a thick, spiral-bound dossier across the mahogany desk. It was the forensic accounting report I had commissioned a week ago, the autopsy of my son-in-law's financial life. I took a sip of the whiskey, letting the burn settle my stomach, and opened the file. I expected to see irresponsibility. I expected to see overspending, maxed-out credit cards, maybe a few missed car payments. I was prepared for a fool. I was not prepared for a criminal. The first number that jumped out at me was $500,000. It was highlighted in red, sitting at the bottom of a column labeled Unsecured High-Risk Liabilities. I looked up at Pendergast. $500,000, I asked. How does a real estate broker with 0 closings in 6 months manage to borrow $500,000? Banks don't lend that kind of money to ghosts. Pendergast grimaced. Banks didn't lend it. Garrison, this isn't a mortgage or a business loan. This is shadow money. He flipped the page, pointing to a series of wire transfers going to accounts in Malta and the Cayman Islands. Brody has a gambling problem, Pendergast explained, his voice low. But not just horses or casinos. He is addicted to high-leverage cryptocurrency speculation and unregulated online poker. He lost $200,000 when the crypto market crashed last winter. Instead of walking away, he doubled down. He borrowed from digital loan sharks. These aren't guys who send you late notices. They send you pictures of your house. I stared at the transfers. The dates aligned perfectly with his sudden, aggressive demands for money from me. The panic in his eyes, the sweat on his forehead, when he demanded the rent, it wasn't just entitlement. It was terror. He was a man with a gun to his head, trying to rob his father-in-law to pay the bullet cost. He owes $300,000 to a syndicate operating out of Eastern Europe, Pendergast continued. The other $200,000 is spread across local bookies and high-interest predatory lenders. The interest alone is $15,000 a month. That is why he needed your trust fund. He wasn't going to manage it. He was going to liquidate it to save his kneecaps. I felt a wave of nausea. My daughter was sleeping next to a man who had essentially sold their future to the mafia. She was in danger, real physical danger, and she was too blinded by the luxury cars and the penthouse view to see the shark swimming in her living room. But then I turned the page to the housing section of the report. Pendergast had listed their living expenses. The rent for the penthouse was listed as $4,500 a month, marked as past due. Pendergast tapped the entry. We need to serve the eviction notice through the property management company tomorrow. It might be complicated because Brody listed himself as a partner in a shell company to get the lease approved initially. We have to pierce that veil to kick him out. I looked at the address on the report. 1500 Lakeshore Drive, Unit 42B. I closed the folder and leaned back in my chair. A strange, bitter laugh bubbled up in my chest. It started low and turned into a dry chuckle that made Pendergast look at me with concern. "What is it?" he asked. "Is the shock setting in?" "No," I said, shaking my head. "It isn't shock. It is irony." "Pendergast, you are a good lawyer, but you missed one detail in my asset portfolio." Pendergast frowned. "I have the list of all your holdings, Garrison. The logistics buy out the stocks, the bonds." "You have the list of my personal holdings," I corrected. "You don't have the full list of the assets held by the blind trust I set up for Catherine before she died. We wanted to diversify into real estate. We wanted passive income." I reached for his pen and wrote a name on the legal pad in front of me. North Star Holdings, LLC. "Does that ring a bell?" I asked. Pendergast's eyes widened. "North Star? They are the holding company that owns the building on Lake Shore Drive. The one Brody lives in." I nodded. "I own the building, Pendergast. I don't just mean I own a unit. I mean I own the dirt, the steel, the glass, and the air rights. I bought the building 4 years ago as a distressed asset. I renovated it. I hired the management company. I stood up and walked to the window looking out at the city. When Brody and Maya said they found their dream apartment, I almost told them. I almost handed them the keys and said, "Welcome home." But Catherine had just passed. I was grieving. And Brody, he was already showing signs of being ungrateful. He criticized the lobby decor. He complained about the doorman. So I decided to stay silent. I told the management company to treat them like any other tenant. I wanted to see if they would respect the property. I turned back to Pendergast. They didn't. They treated it like a hotel room they could trash because Daddy was paying the bill. But here is the punchline, Pendergast. That $4,500 a month. Brody has been screaming at me to transfer. He was demanding that I give him money so he could pay me. He has been laundering my own money back to me for 3 years, skimming off the top, and acting like a big-shot landlord. Pendergast looked stunned. He started to laugh, a sound of pure disbelief. "You are his landlord. He is 5 months behind on rent to his own father-in-law." "And he doesn't know," I said. "He has no idea. He thinks he is fighting a faceless corporation. He thinks he can charm or bully a property manager. He doesn't know that the eviction notice he is about to receive is signed by the man he just tried to commit to an asylum." I walked back to the desk and tapped the report. "This changes the eviction strategy. I don't just want to evict him for non-payment. I want to evict him for using the premises for illegal activities." "Illegal activities?" Pendergast asked. "Gambling," I said. "If he owes that much to bookies, he isn't just playing online. He is hosting." I saw the poker tables in the background of Maya's Instagram stories. "He is running a high-stakes game in my penthouse to try and pay off the sharks. That is a violation of the lease, the condo bylaws, and state law." I looked Pendergast dead in the eye. "Draft the eviction notice. Cite the illegal gambling. And Pendergast, send a copy to the condo board. Send a copy to the police vice squad. And send a personal copy to Brody Miller, care of North Star Holdings LLC, signed by the managing partner Garrison Ford. I want him to know. I want him to look at that paper and realize that the roof over his head, the walls around him, the floor he walks on, it all belongs to the man he called senile. I want him to realize that he has been living in the belly of the beast, and the beast just woke up." Pendergast began typing furiously. The clicking of the keys was the only sound in the room, a rhythmic drumbeat of impending doom. I finished my whiskey. The taste was sharp and clean. The debt was bad. The gambling was worse. But the fact that he was running a criminal enterprise in my wife's investment property, that was the end. There would be no mercy. Not for the debt. Not for the eviction. And certainly not for the man who tried to steal my freedom to pay for his sins. The trap was set. The bait was taken. Now it was time to snap the neck. The sun rose over Chicago with a deceptive brilliance, casting long golden shadows across my study floor. It was the kind of morning that promised new beginnings, but for the tenants of Unit 42B at 1500 Lake Shore Drive. It was the beginning of the end. I sat in my leather armchair, a cup of Earl Grey steaming on the coaster, my eyes fixed on the tablet screen propped up against a stack of books. I had access to the building security feed, specifically the hallway camera on the 42nd floor. I was waiting for the courier. Pendergast had been efficient. He didn't send a regular process server. He sent a bonded courier from a high-end legal firm, a man in a sharp suit who looked like he was delivering a winning lottery ticket rather than a death sentence. At 9:15, the elevator doors slid open. The courier stepped out, adjusting his tie, and walked briskly down the plush carpeted hallway. He stopped at 42B. He didn't knock. He pressed the doorbell once firmly. I watched as the door swung open. Brody stood there, shirtless, his hair messy, holding a mug of coffee that I knew he hadn't paid for. He looked annoyed, the arrogance of the night before still clinging to him like a bad smell. He probably thought it was a delivery, maybe another gadget or pair of shoes he had bought on credit. The courier said something brief, handed him a thick red envelope, and turned on his heel. He didn't wait for a signature. This kind of notice didn't require one. Brody looked at the envelope. It was marked Urgent Legal Notice of Lease Termination. He ripped it open right there in the hallway. I zoomed in on the screen. I wanted to see the exact moment the words hit him. He pulled out the document. It wasn't a standard late rent notice. It was a formal notice to quit based on breach of contract. Pendergast had highlighted the specific clause in bold ink, violation of Section 14, Paragraph C, prohibition of illegal commercial activity and unlawful gambling on premises. I saw Brody's shoulders stiffen. He froze. The color drained from his face so fast, it looked like a light switch had been flipped. He didn't just look scared. He looked terrified. He knew what that clause meant. It meant that North Star Holdings knew. It meant the landlord knew about the Tuesday night poker games, the flow of unlaundered cash, the sharks swimming in the living room. And in Illinois, a landlord can evict a tenant in as little as 5 days if the property is being used for illegal activities. 5 days, not months. 5 days before the sheriff comes to put a padlock on the door. He slammed the door shut. I switched the feed to the internal camera I had installed in the main living area years ago to monitor the contractors during the renovation. I usually kept it off for their privacy, but today I felt justified in reactivating the audio. Brody was pacing the living room like a trapped rat. He threw the paper onto the glass coffee table. "Maya," he screamed. "Maya, get out here." Maya ran into the room, still in her silk robe. What happened?" Brody pointed a shaking finger at the paper. "They know. The management company knows about the game. They are evicting us. 5 days, Maya. We have 5 days to get out." Maya picked up the paper. Her hands trembled. But we can just pay the rent, right? If we get the money from Dad." "It is not about the rent." Brody roared, grabbing his hair. "They cited illegal gambling. Do you know what that means? It means they can call the police. If the cops raid this place..." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. If the cops raided the place, they would find the ledgers. They would find the debt. The loan sharks would find out he was burned, and Brody would be a dead man walking. He scrambled for his phone. "I have to call them. I have to fix this. I can talk my way out of this. I just need to speak to the owner." I watched him dial the number printed at the bottom of the notice. It was a direct line for urgent legal appeals. In my study, the burner phone sitting on my desk began to ring. It was a simple black flip phone I had bought specifically for this moment. I let it ring once, twice, 3 times. I wanted him to sweat. I wanted him to feel the silence stretching out the possibility of no answer gnawing at his gut. On the fourth ring, I picked it up. I didn't say hello. I didn't identify myself. I just pressed the phone to my ear and breathed. Hello? Hello? Is this the owner? Is this Mr. North? Brody's voice was high-pitched, cracking with panic. He sounded nothing like the bully who had threatened me in my own foyer. He sounded like a child who had broken a window and heard the police sirens coming. I remained silent. I could hear his heavy breathing, the background noise of Maya sobbing. Look, please don't hang up, Brody pleaded, talking fast, tripping over his words. I got the notice. There has been a misunderstanding, a huge misunderstanding. We aren't running a gambling ring. It is just a friendly game. Just guys hanging out. Penny stakes. It is nothing illegal, I swear. I listened to the lie. It was so effortless for him. Penny stakes. The forensic report showed $50,000 swings in a single night. Please, sir, he continued, his voice dropping to a desperate whisper. You can't kick us out. My wife, she is pregnant. She is high risk. We have nowhere to go. If you do this, you are putting a baby on the street. I closed my eyes. He was using the fake pregnancy again. He was using the lie I had already exposed to him, repurposing it for a stranger, hoping to pull on the heartstrings of a faceless corporation. It was pathological. He didn't know how to tell the truth. He only knew how to manipulate. Sir, are you there? Look, I can pay. I have money coming. A big inheritance. My father-in-law. He is sick. He is losing his mind. We are taking control of his estate next week. Once the papers are signed, I can pay you double the back rent. Triple. Just give me 2 weeks. Please, do not call the police. My grip tightened on the phone. He was selling my death. He was promising a stranger money from my own grave to save his skin. He was leveraging my dementia to cover his crimes. The rage flared hot in my chest, urging me to scream, to tell him exactly who he was talking to, but I swallowed it. That was what an emotional man would do. A strategic man waits for the kill shot. I took a deep breath. I let it out slowly, a long, heavy sigh that rattled through the microphone. It was the sound of a judge who had heard enough lies. It was the sound of a door closing forever. Sir Brody asked, his voice trembling. I didn't speak. I just pressed the end call button. The click was final. I watched the screen. Brody pulled the phone away from his ear, staring at it in disbelief. He hung up. He whispered to Maya. He just sighed and hung up. What does that mean? Maya cried. It means he doesn't care, Brody said, dropping onto the sofa, his face burying in his hands. It means we are done. I set the burner phone down on the desk. He was wrong. It didn't mean I didn't care. It meant I cared too much about justice to let him talk his way out of it. He had tried to sell my future to pay for his past. Now he was going to learn that the landlord is always watching, and the rent is finally due. The invitation had been sent out via email 3 days prior, marked with a high-priority flag. It was titled, A Celebration of Legacy and New Horizons. It was Brody's Hail Mary pass. He was cornered, facing eviction in less than 48 hours, owing $500,000 to criminals and under investigation for credit card fraud. Most men would have fled. Most men would have packed a bag and disappeared into the night. But Brody was not most men. He was a narcissist of the highest order. He believed he could talk his way out of an avalanche. The party was held in the penthouse, my penthouse, the very unit he was being evicted from. He had invited everyone, his potential investors, the marks he was trying to lure into a non-existent real estate development fund. He invited his stepfather, the wealthy car dealership mogul he despised, but desperately needed to impress. He invited the condo board members, likely to show them that he was still liquid, still powerful, hoping to bluff his way out of the eviction notice. And he invited me. His text message was brief. Be there at 8. Wear a suit. We are doing the signing in front of witnesses. If you don't show up, I call the state facility and have them pick you up for a wellness check tonight. He was doubling down on the threat. He wanted a public spectacle. He wanted to parade his conquered father-in-law in front of his investors, forcing me to sign the trust transfer documents as a show of family unity and financial backing. It was a power move designed to legitimize him. If Garrison Ford, the respected logistics magnate, trusted him with millions, surely these investors could trust him with a few $100,000. I arrived at 8 o'clock sharp. I did not wear the moth-eaten sweater I had worn to the lawyer's office. I wore my bespoke navy tuxedo, the one I hadn't worn since a gala at the Art Institute 5 years ago. I shaved. I stood tall. I walked into the lobby of my own building, and for the first time I didn't hide from the doorman. "Good evening, Mr. Ford," the doorman said, his eyes widening slightly at my appearance. "Good evening, Henry," I replied. "I am going up to 42B. And Henry, if you see any police cars arrive later, please send them straight up." I took the private elevator to the penthouse. The doors opened directly into the foyer. The noise hit me first. The thumping bass of house music, the clinking of crystal, the roar of 50 people drinking expensive champagne. Brody had gone all out. There were caterers passing hors d'oeuvres. There was an open bar fully stocked with top-shelf liquor. He was spending money he didn't have to impress people who didn't care. I stepped into the living room. The floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the lake, a view that usually brought me peace but tonight served only as a backdrop for treachery. Brody spotted me immediately. He was standing near the fireplace holding a glass of scotch, surrounded by 3 men in expensive suits. He did a double take when he saw me. He was expecting the frail, confused old man. Instead, he got the CEO. For a second, fear flickered in his eyes, but he drowned it quickly with arrogance. He excused himself from his circle and marched over to me, grabbing my arm with a grip that was meant to be bruising. "What are you wearing?" he hissed, leaning close so no one could hear. "You look too coherent. You are supposed to look like you need help." I pulled my arm away, dusting off the sleeve of my jacket. "It is a party, Brody," I said calmly. "I dressed for the occasion." Brody narrowed his eyes. "Don't try anything, old man. The lawyer is here with the notary. At 8:30 we are going to make a toast. You are going to go up to the microphone, you are going to say you are retiring and handing the reins to me, and you are going to sign the papers. Do it right, and maybe I will let you have a room with a window at the facility." He didn't wait for an answer. He turned around and clapped his hands loudly, the sound echoing through the room. Everyone, please gather round." The music lowered. The guests turned toward the fireplace. I saw Maya standing by the window. She was wearing a silver dress, looking pale and thin. She was drinking again. I could see it in the way she swayed slightly, the glass of wine clutched in her hand like a lifeline. She saw me, and for a moment her face crumpled with guilt. But then she looked at Brody, and the mask slammed back into place. Brody stood in front of the fireplace, beaming like a king addressing his court. "Thank you all for coming tonight," he boomed. "Tonight is a very special night. As you know, family is the cornerstone of everything we do. And tonight we are celebrating a passing of the torch." He gestured to me. "My father-in-law, Garrison Ford, a giant in the logistics industry, has decided to step back. He has decided to entrust the management of his estate and his future investments to Maya and myself. It is a huge responsibility, but one we accept with humility and honor." There was a polite round of applause. Brody's stepfather, the silver-haired tycoon, nodded approvingly from the back of the room. This was the moment Brody had been dreaming of. The validation, the money, the power. Brody waved the notary forward. A small table had been set up with the documents laid out, a gold pen waiting. Garrison, please, Brody said, his voice dripping with fake affection. Come say a few words and make it official. I walked through the crowd. The guests parted for me. I could feel their eyes assessing me. I stepped up to the fireplace. I looked at the documents. The trust transfer. The power of attorney. The keys to my life. I looked at Brody. He was sweating. His smile was tight, his eyes manic. I took the microphone from his hand. Thank you, Brody, I said. My voice was clear, strong, resonating through the room speakers. I looked out at the crowd. My son-in-law is right. Tonight is a night of revelation. He told you I am stepping back. He told you I am entrusting him with my legacy. I reached into my pocket. Brody tensed, probably expecting me to pull out reading glasses or a handkerchief. Instead, I pulled out a small silver USB drive. But before I sign anything, I continued, I think it is important for everyone here, especially Brody's potential investors and his family, to understand exactly what kind of businessman Brody is. I think you should hear his vision for the future in his own words. Brody's smile faltered. What is that? He asked, reaching for the mic. I sidestepped him. I walked over to the sound system rack located in the corner of the room. I knew exactly how it worked, because I had installed it. I plugged the USB into the main console. Garrison, stop! Brody yelled, panic finally breaking through his facade. He is confused. He doesn't know what he is doing. I hit the play button. The speakers crackled for a second. And then Brody's voice filled the room. It wasn't his party voice. It was the voice I had recorded yesterday in the lawyer's office, and the voice from the phone call I had intercepted earlier that week when he thought he was alone in the apartment. The audio was crystal clear. Still, Brody's voice. Listen, I just need the old man to sign the trust. Once I have control, we liquidate the portfolio. I don't care about the taxes. I need the cash. A pause. The guests started to murmur. Brody froze, his face draining of color. Another voice on the recording, his lawyer. But what about his care, the facility? Brody's voice again laughing. Put him in the state ward. Who cares? He won't last 6 months. He is just a speed bump. As soon as he signs, he is dead to me. Literally. I hope he dies. It would save me the monthly fees. The room went silent. The shock was physical. I saw Brody's stepfather lower his drink, his face hardening. But the recording wasn't done. Brody's voice, and don't worry about the investors. Those idiots, they think they are buying into a luxury high-rise development. I am using their deposits to pay off the Russians. It is a classic Ponzi man. Robbing Peter to pay Vlad. By the time they realize the land doesn't exist, I will be in non-extradition. The 3 men in suits who had been drinking with Brody earlier looked at each other. One of them pulled out his phone, likely calling his bank to cancel a check. Brody lunged for the sound system. Turn it off. It is fake. It is AI. He is crazy. I blocked him. I am 68, but I was fueled by the righteous fury of a father scorned. I shoved him back. Listen, I commanded. The recording shifted. It was a phone call. Brody's voice, yeah, my stepfather is coming. The old prick. He thinks he is so smart with his car dealerships. Tacky old man. He smells like cheap leather and desperation. I just need him there for the optics. Once I get Garrison's money, I don't need to kiss his ring anymore. I will buy and sell him. I looked at the stepfather. His tan face had turned a dark, angry red. He placed his glass on a table with a deliberate, heavy clink and stared at Brody with eyes that promised violence. And then the final clip. The one that was for Maya. Lawyer's voice, and your wife, does she know the extent of the debt? Brody's voice, Maya. Please. She is clueless. She believes anything I tell her. I told her to fake a pregnancy to guilt her dad, and she did it. She is pathetic. She is just a stupid milk cow I milk for the trust fund. She has no spine. As soon as the money is secured, I am dumping her. I already have a girl lined up in Miami. Maya can rot in the suburbs with her crazy father." The recording ended. The silence in the penthouse was absolute. The only sound was the wind howling outside the windows. I looked at Maya. She was standing frozen by the window. The wine glass had slipped from her fingers and shattered on the floor, splashing red wine across the hem of her silver dress. She looked like she had been shot. Her mouth was open, her eyes wide and unseeing. She was staring at Brody as if looking at a stranger, a monster wearing her husband's skin. Brody stood in the center of the room. He was trembling. He looked around, looking for an ally, looking for an exit. That was edited. He stammered, his voice high and thin. He made that up. He is senile. You can't believe a senile old man. I walked back to the fireplace. I picked up the gold pen. I snapped it in half. "I am not senile, Brody," I said, my voice filling the silent room. "I am the man who owns the building you are standing in. I am the man who paid for the suit you are wearing. And I am the man who just handed your confession to every person you tried to scam." I pointed to the door. "The party is over." But before anyone could move, the elevator doors slid open with a soft chime. 4 police officers stepped out, followed by 2 agents in windbreakers labeled FBI. Pendergast walked out behind them, looking grimly satisfied. "Brody Miller," the lead agent asked. Brody took a step back, bumping into the table. "We have a warrant for your arrest," the agent said, holding up a piece of paper. "Wire fraud, identity theft, money laundering, and thanks to a tip we received regarding unauthorized credit card use across state lines, grand larceny." Brody looked at me. He looked at Maya. He looked at his stepfather. "Help me," he whispered. His stepfather turned his back on him and walked toward the door. Maya didn't move. She just stood there, tears streaming down her face, the red wine stain spreading on her dress, like a wound that wouldn't stop bleeding. The officers moved in. They grabbed Brody's arms. He didn't fight. He went limp, the arrogance finally drained out of him, leaving nothing but a hollow, terrified shell. As they handcuffed him and marched him toward the elevator, he looked back at me one last time. There was no hate in his eyes anymore. Just the terrifying realization that he had played a game against a grandmaster and lost everything. I watched the elevator doors close. The guests began to scatter, muttering, rushing to leave the scene of the crime. I walked over to the window and looked out at the city lights. I felt a hand on my arm. It was Pendergast. "It is done," he said softly. I looked at Maya, who was now sitting on the floor amidst the broken glass, sobbing into her hands. "No," I said. "The cleanup is just beginning." The sudden arrival of law enforcement has a way of sucking the oxygen out of a room, but Brody, in his infinite delusion, still thought he had one card left to play. He wasn't in handcuffs yet. The agents were securing the perimeter, blocking the exits, their presence looming large against the backdrop of the city skyline. Brody pulled himself up, adjusting his jacket, trying to summon the ghost of the arrogance he had worn just minutes before. He looked at the lead FBI agent, then pointed a trembling finger at the door. "You have no right to barge in here," he stammered, his voice rising in a pitch that betrayed his terror. "This is a private residence. This is my penthouse. I have rights. You need a warrant to enter my home. Get out immediately, or I will sue the department for harassment." I watched him from the fireplace. It was pathetic. It was the last gasp of a drowning man trying to order the ocean to stop moving. I looked at Pendergast. He gave me a subtle nod. It was time for the final revelation, the one that would strip Brody of not just his freedom, but his very sense of reality. I stepped forward, the heavy file folder I had brought with me tucked under my arm. The room fell silent again. The guests, the investors, even the police officers seemed to sense that the true authority in the room wasn't wearing a badge. "It is not your penthouse, Brody," I said, my voice cutting through the tension like a razor. "And it never was." Brody spun around to face me, his eyes wild. "Shut up, old man. I signed the lease. I pay the rent. It is my home." I opened the folder. I pulled out a document stamped with the official seal of the Cook County Recorder of Deeds. I walked over to the coffee table, pushing aside a tray of uneaten caviar, and laid the paper down. "You signed a lease with North Star Holdings, LLC," I corrected him. "A property management firm. You assumed it was just some faceless corporation. You never bothered to check who the managing partner was. You never looked at the incorporation papers. You were too busy spending my money to wonder where the building came from." I pointed at the signature line at the bottom of the deed. "Read it, Brody." He looked down. He didn't want to look, but he couldn't help himself. I saw his eyes scan the lines. I saw the moment his brain processed the information. Managing partner Garrison Ford. He recoiled as if the paper had burned him. He looked at me, his mouth opening and closing, no sound coming out. "You," he whispered. "You own the building." "I own the building," I confirmed. "I own the walls you hung your art on. I own the floor you are standing on. I own the roof you use to throw your parties. For 4 years, Brody, you haven't been paying rent to a corporation. You have been paying me. Or rather, you have been taking the allowance I gave you and handing a portion of it back to me, pretending you were a big shot living in a sky palace." I turned to the head of building security, a man named Frank, who had come up with the police. I had hired Frank 5 years ago. He knew exactly who signed his paychecks. "Frank," I said. "Yes, Mr. Ford," Frank replied, stepping forward, his hand resting on his belt. "This tenant is in violation of his lease due to illegal commercial activity, specifically the operation of an unlicensed gambling ring, as well as failure to pay rent for the last 5 months. I am exercising my right as the property owner to secure the premises immediately." I looked at Brody. "I want this unit sealed. Now. Nobody takes anything out. Not a painting, not a watch, not a bottle of wine. Everything inside is now collateral against the debt owed to the landlord." Frank nodded. "Understood, sir." He pulled a set of heavy-duty padlocks and a roll of orange eviction tape from his tactical vest. Brody looked around the room. He looked at his investors, the men he had brought here to dazzle with his lifestyle. They were staring at him with expressions of pure disgust. The illusion was shattered. He wasn't a successful developer. He was a squatter living in his father-in-law's spare room. "You can't do this," Brody screamed, lunging toward me. "My stuff, my laptop, my files." The FBI agent stepped in, blocking Brody with a forearm like a steel bar. "You won't be needing your laptop, Mr. Miller," the agent said. "That is now evidence." Evidence of what Brody cried. "I didn't do anything." The agent pulled out a second warrant. This one wasn't for the arrest. It was for the seizure of assets. "We have the forensic accounting report provided by Mr. Ford's legal team," the agent said, his voice bored, reciting the facts. "It details a pattern of wire fraud, money laundering through online gambling sites, and identity theft. Specifically, the unauthorized use of a credit card belonging to Garrison Ford to the tune of $20,000 for floral arrangements, which constitutes grand larceny and credit card fraud across state lines." The agent looked at the investors huddled by the window. "And for the gentleman in the suits over there, we also have evidence of a Ponzi scheme involving non-existent real estate developments in Florida. If you wrote this man a check, I suggest you cancel it before the ink dries." One of the investors, a man with a red face, stepped forward. He spat on the floor next to Brody's shoe. "You told me you owned the land. You told me you had the permits. I didn't." "I was going to get them," Brody pleaded, but the man had already turned away. The agent nodded to his partner. "Cuff him." The sound of the handcuffs ratcheting shut was the loudest noise I had ever heard. It was the sound of a steel trap snapping onto the leg of a wolf. Brody's hands were pulled behind his back. He winced, letting out a small, pathetic whimper. They began to march him toward the door. He struggled, trying to dig his heels into the expensive carpet. Wait, Garrison. Dad. He looked at me, his eyes wide and wet with tears. Dad, please. You can't let them take me. I am family. I am your son. I stood there, my tuxedo immaculate, my face stone. I looked at him. I really looked at him. I searched for any shred of the young man I had welcomed into my home 4 years ago. I searched for a redeeming quality. I found nothing but greed and fear. I am not your father, Brody, I said softly. And you are not my son. You are a tenant who didn't pay his rent. The officers hauled him out into the hallway. As they dragged him past the elevator bank, past the neighbors who had opened their doors to see the commotion, past the doorman, who had come up to assist Brody, began to scream. It wasn't a scream of innocence. It was the scream of a narcissist who had finally met a mirror he couldn't break. I turned back to the room. The party was over in every sense of the word. Frank, the security guard, was already moving through the penthouse, ushering the shell-shocked guests toward the exit. Folks, you need to leave, Frank announced. The premises are being sealed by the owner. Please exit immediately. I watched them go. The influencers, the hangers on the people who had eaten my food and drank my wine while laughing at my exclusion. They couldn't get out fast enough. They avoided my gaze, heads down, scurrying like roaches shiz when the lights turn on. Maya was the last one left. She was sitting on the floor near the window, the red wine stain on her dress drying into a dark, rusty color. She wasn't crying anymore. She was just staring at the empty space where Brody had been standing. Frank looked at me, then at Maya. Mr. Ford. The lady, I walked over to her. I stood over her, casting a shadow across her face. Get up, Maya, I said. She looked up at me. Her eyes were hollow. Dad? Where will I go? I don't know, I said. You have a husband. He is currently in the custody of the federal government. I suggest you call a lawyer. But not with my money. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the credit card she had in her purse, the one I had canceled days ago, but she had kept hoping it would miraculously work again. I had taken it from the table where she left her clutch. I snapped it in half and dropped the pieces into her lap. You are evicted, Maya. You have 5 minutes to grab what you can carry in your hands. Anything else stays. But my clothes, my jewelry, collateral, I said. For the debt. You signed the lease, too. You are jointly and severally liable. She stood up, shaky on her heels. She looked around the beautiful apartment, the life she had thought was hers by right. She realized finally that she owned nothing. She was a guest who had overstayed her welcome. She grabbed her purse. She didn't look at me again. She walked out the door, past the security guard, who was already applying the orange tape across the doorframe. I was the last one to leave. I walked through the silent apartment. I looked at the view of the lake one last time. It was a beautiful view. I had bought this building because of that view. I had hoped to watch my grandchildren play in this room. I turned off the lights. I walked out into the hallway. Frank placed the final padlock on the door. He handed me the key. Secured, Mr. Ford. Thank you, Frank, I said, pocketing the key. I walked to the elevator. I felt lighter. The weight of the secret, the weight of the deception was gone. I had burned down the house of lies they had built. Now all that was left was to sweep up the ashes. 3 weeks after the raid on the penthouse, I stood in the driveway of the house in the suburbs one last time. The for sale sign had a sold sticker slapped across it. The movers had already left with the few pieces of furniture I decided to keep sending them to storage. I was done. I was checking the oil in the engine of my new RV, a 40-foot beast of a vehicle that was going to be my new home when a taxi pulled up to the curb. It wasn't a luxury sedan. It was a rusted yellow cab with a squeaky brake pad. The back door opened and Maya stepped out. She looked like a ghost of the woman who had stood in my foyer, demanding money just a month ago. Her hair was pulled back in a messy bun, the roots showing dark against the expensive blonde highlights that were growing out. She wasn't wearing designer clothes. She was wearing a pair of sweatpants and a hoodie that looked 2 sizes too big. She carried a single duffel bag, clutching it to her chest like a shield. She didn't storm up the driveway this time. She walked slowly, her head down her shoulders, hunched. She stopped 10 feet away from me, waiting for permission to speak. I wiped my hands on a rag and leaned against the grill of the RV. I didn't say anything. I let the silence stretch, forcing her to make the first move. "Dad," she whispered. Her voice was raspy, as if she had been crying for days. I looked at her. I didn't see my little girl. I saw a stranger who had tried to destroy me. "I have nowhere to go," she said, tears beginning to spill over her cheeks. The bank froze everything. The lawyers took the rest for Brody's defense fund, but then he fired them and they kept the retainer. "I am staying in a motel on Cicero Avenue, but I ran out of cash this morning. They kicked me out." She took a step closer, her eyes pleading. "Please, Dad. I am your daughter. You can't let me sleep on the street." "You have a husband," I said coldly. "He is in jail," she cried out. "And he blames me. He told his lawyer that I knew about the gambling, that I encouraged him. He is trying to throw me under the bus to get a plea deal." She dropped the duffel bag and fell to her knees on the concrete. It was a dramatic gesture, one she had probably practiced, but there was a raw desperation in it that was real. It was all him, Dad. "You have to believe me. Brody, he is a monster. He manipulated me. He brainwashed me. He told me you were mean, that you were holding out on us. He made me say those things to you. He made me lie about the pregnancy. I was scared of him. I didn't want to do any of it. I was a victim too." I listened to her sob. It was a compelling story. The innocent wife led astray by the sociopathic husband. It was the narrative she was trying to sell to the prosecutors, and now she was trying to sell it to me. She wanted to be rescued. She wanted to be the little girl again, safe in her father's house while the big bad wolf went to prison. But I knew something the prosecutors didn't know yet. I knew something that shattered her story of innocent victimhood into a million pieces. "Get up, Maya," I said. She looked up, hope flickering in her eyes. She thought I was relenting. She stood up, wiping her face with her sleeve. "Thank you, Daddy. I knew you would understand. I just need a place to stay for a while, maybe some money to get a lawyer for the divorce." I reached into the front seat of the RV and pulled out a manila envelope. It wasn't money. It was a photocopy of a document Pendergast had unearthed during the final audit of my assets, specifically the ones related to Catherine's estate. I walked over to her and held out the paper. "Do you recognize this?" I asked. Maya took the paper. She looked at it. I saw the moment recognition hit her. Her pupils dilated. Her breath hitched in her throat. She tried to hand it back as if touching it burned her skin. I don't know what this is," she stammered, backing away. "It is a withdrawal request from your mother's life insurance policy," I said, my voice steady and hard. "The supplemental policy she kept in a separate account, the one meant for emergency medical expenses. It was cashed out 2 years ago. $25,000. I pointed to the bottom of the page. "Look at the signature, Maya." She wouldn't look. She stared at the ground, shaking her head. "It says Garrison Ford," I continued. "But that isn't my handwriting. My signature has a loop on the G. This one is sharp, and it isn't Brody's handwriting either. His is messy, illegible scrawl." I took a step closer, forcing her to look at me. "But I know whose handwriting it is. I have seen it on birthday cards for 30 years. I saw it on your homework. I saw it on the lease agreement you signed. That is your handwriting, Maya. You forged my signature." "No," she whispered. "Brody made me. Brody couldn't make you do this." I cut her off. This required you to walk into the bank branch with my stolen ID, which you must have taken from my wallet when I was visiting. It required you to sit in front of a teller and pretend to be authorized. It required you to look at a document that represented the last safety net your mother left and decide that you needed a new handbag or a vacation more than you respected her memory. I snatched the paper back from her. Brody is a thief and a gambler, I said. But he didn't do this. You did. You crossed a line that even he didn't touch. You stole from your dead mother. You desecrated her legacy because you were greedy, not scared. Greedy. Maya was sobbing openly now, ugly, gasping sounds. But they didn't move me. I felt like a surgeon cutting out a tumor. It was painful, but it was necessary to survive. Manipulation can make you stay silent. Maya, I said, delivering the verdict that would end our relationship. Manipulation can make you lie to protect your husband. But manipulation cannot make you pick up a pen, practice your father's signature, and steal from the dead. That wasn't fear. That was your own heart. That was your own greed. I walked back to the driver's side of the RV. I opened the door and climbed up into the cab. I looked down at her one last time. She looked small and pathetic standing there in the driveway of the house she had grown up in, a house she was now barred from entering. "Dad." "Please," she screamed, grabbing the door handle. "Don't leave me, I have nothing. I will go to jail." "Then you will go to jail," I said, "and you will have plenty of time to think about why you are there." I pulled the door shut. I locked it. I started the engine. The massive diesel motor roared to life, drowning out her screams. I didn't look in the rearview mirror as I pulled out of the driveway. I didn't want my last memory of that house to be my daughter, begging for a salvation she didn't deserve. I put the transmission in drive and turned the wheel toward the highway. I wasn't saving her. I was saving myself. And for the first time in a long time, the road ahead looked clear. The odometer on my RV just rolled over 12,000 miles as I crossed the state line into Arizona. It is a 40-foot horizon, a rolling palace of chrome and leather that drives smoother than any luxury sedan I ever owned. For the last year, this machine has been my entire world. I traded the stagnant air of that empty colonial house in the suburbs for the smell of diesel and the salty breeze of the Pacific Coast Highway. I traded the suffocating silence of a life betrayed for the roar of the open road. I sold it all. The day after Maya walked down that driveway, I called a liquidator. I didn't want an estate sale. I didn't want strangers picking through Catherine's china or haggling over the dining table where my family used to eat. I sold the contents of the house in one lot. I sold the house itself to a young couple with a baby on the way and a golden retriever. I hope the walls treat them better than they treated me. I even sold North Star Holdings. A conglomerate from New York made an offer on the building, and I signed the papers without a second thought. I walked away with a check that had more zeros than Brody could count in a lifetime, but the weight of the check was nothing compared to the lightness in my chest. I am not hoarding the money. A man alone in an RV does not need millions to be happy. I need fuel, I need good coffee, and I need satellite internet to check on my new project. I call it the Catherine Fund. It is not a charity that hands out soup. It is a war chest. I hired a team of forensic accountants and aggressive litigators, the kind of lawyers who wake up angry. We find elderly people who are being financially abused by their children or caregivers. We find the grandmothers who are signing over deeds under duress. We find the grandfathers whose pensions are being siphoned off by sons with gambling debts. And we strike. We freeze assets. We file civil suits. We put the fear of God into predators who think their parents are easy targets. Just last week, we recovered a family farm in Oregon for a woman whose daughter had forged a power of attorney. Hearing that woman cry, tears of relief over the phone was the only return on investment I will ever need. I am doing it for Catherine. She would have been heartbroken by what Maya became, but she would have been proud that I turned our pain into a shield for others. I pulled the RV into the South Rim campground, just as the afternoon light was turning gold. I parked the rig, leveled the jacks, and stepped out into the crisp desert air. The Grand Canyon lay before me, a vast, silent testament to the power of time and endurance. It is a place that makes human problems feel microscopic. It makes a betrayal by a daughter, a prison sentence for a son-in-law, feel like dust in the wind. I set up my folding chair near the edge of the bluff, away from the tourists taking selfies. I poured a cup of coffee from my thermos. It was hot, black, and perfect. I sat there watching the shadows lengthen, painting the rock layers in shades of violet and burnt orange. I breathed in. I breathed out. For the first time in 40 years, I wasn't waiting for a phone call. I wasn't waiting for a crisis. I wasn't waiting to be needed. And then my phone vibrated on the small table next to me. It was a harsh mechanical sound that cut through the serenity of the sunset. I looked down at the screen. It wasn't Pendergast. It wasn't the fund manager. It was an unknown number. I stared at it. I knew who it was. Pendergast sends me updates every month. Brody is 1 year into a 10-year federal sentence. He is working in the kitchen scrubbing pots. Maya took a plea deal. Probation, community service. She is living in a studio apartment in Joliet, working double shifts as a waitress to pay off the restitution order. Pendergast told me she tries to find my number. She calls his office begging for my contact info. She tells people she has changed. She tells people she is a victim. The phone kept buzzing. It danced across the table, insistent, desperate. I could pick it up. I could listen to her voice. I could hear the apologies that would inevitably turn into requests. I could hear her tell me how hard her life is, how unfair the judge was, how much she misses her daddy. I could let her drag me back into the mud. I could let the guilt creep back in the biological imperative to save my child. But then I looked at the canyon. I looked at the hawk circling the thermals a mile out over the Colorado River. I realized that I had already saved her. I saved her by letting her fall. I saved her by forcing her to finally, for the first time in her life, face the reality of her own choices. If she was going to swim, she had to do it without my life vest. And if she was going to sink, I couldn't be the one to drag her up. I picked up the phone. I didn't slide the answer button. I didn't decline the call. I just smiled. It wasn't a smile of vengeance. It wasn't a smile of cruelty. It was the smile of a man who had finally put down a heavy load he had been carrying for too long. I stood up and walked over to the bear-proof trash bin secured to a metal post nearby. The phone was still buzzing in my hand, a little heartbeat of drama trying to infect my peace. I lifted the lid of the bin. It smelled of old campfire ash and pine needles. I dropped the phone inside. It clattered against the metal bottom, landing somewhere between a crushed soda can and a discarded map. The buzzing stopped. The connection was broken. Not just the call, but the tether. I walked back to my chair and sat down. I picked up my coffee and took a sip. The sun dipped below the horizon, setting the sky on fire. I was alone in the middle of a desert, miles from the life I used to know. I had no address. I had no schedule. I had no one asking me for rent money. I took a deep breath of the cooling air. I had never felt so full. They told me they only invited special people to their wedding. They were right to do so, because it taught me that I am a special person too. And for the rest of my life, I am going to treat myself like one. The engine of the RV was cool, but tomorrow I would fire it up again. The road was waiting, and I had a lot of miles left to go. This journey taught me that true family is built on mutual respect, not just biological obligation. For years, I mistook enabling for love, believing that if I provided enough financial safety, I could protect my daughter from the world and herself. But I learned the hard way that you cannot save people who are determined to drown, nor can you buy the affection of those who only see you as a resource. Setting boundaries isn't an act of cruelty. It is an act of survival. It is never too late to reclaim your dignity, rewrite your ending, and realize that being alone is far better than being with people who make you feel lonely. If you agree that your dignity is worth more than keeping the peace in a toxic relationship, hit that subscribe button and let me know in the comments. Would you have answered that final call?